Thanks for tuning in. Candy's Prayer Closet is bringing you the second half of Miss Helen's story. On today's episode, we will catch the remainder of Helen's story and we will really get to dive into what God has done for her towards the end of her story. I do have to apologize because we did lose our mics towards the end of the episode. Well, probably about halfway through this episode. We did lose our mic recording, so the audio is going to sound different and it's not going to be as good as the first episode. So I apologize so much about that. Helen has so much wonderful things to share. So I hope it's not a distraction and I hope you guys can hear us pretty well. And I promise to try to do better next time. But anyway, tune in right now for the remainder of her story. So in September, you moved back to Florida and you moved in with Chuck.
I do.
And in the spring, you found out that your job reservation was not given for the Air Force and the only opening was a cook. And so you were like, not doing this. So you chose to discharge.
I did.
Because you were remind me, what kind of mechanic?
Aerospace ground equipment mechanic.
And so you're like, I'm not going from this to cook.
No, I mean, it was like, there's nothing wrong with being a cook, but
it just wasn't for you.
It wasn't for me.
And so you discharged in July. You went back home to Arkansas and you left your boyfriend.
I was heartbroken. And he asked me to stay. He's like, you don't have to leave.
Yeah, just because you discharged.
And I told him I was scared because I was afraid I couldn't get a job. But I couldn't let anybody, especially a male, have complete control over my life. And that's what was going to happen.
Because he was going to be relying on him.
Yes. And he's like, but I'll help you. And I was like,
I can totally relate to that.
I'm like,
yeah,
I couldn't do it.
And so you were majorly in love with him, though.
I cried for 11 hours coming home. That's how long it took me to drive from there to Dad's house.
And so you get home and
right back to drinking.
So a few months later, you start work at ConAgra, first female mechanic at the Batesville plant. And we are in around 96-ish. Is that where we are?
No, 92.
Oh, are we still in 92? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, gotcha. So in October of 92, you started using drugs. Do you want to elaborate on that any?
I just started playing with pot and pills mostly. And then it wasn't too long after that I tried meth. And I liked it.
I'm going to tell you, whenever you shared your story with me for the first time and you got to this part, I was like, Helen?
And there's going to be a lot of people like that because very few people know it. I'm good at keeping a secret.
Right.
I mean, so until 19.
I got here from 93 to 95. It was clubs, dancing, alcohol, and drugs.
Absolutely. And making it to work when I could.
So in 95, you're 25 years old and you chose to start recovery meetings.
I did. My sister had actually started recovery meetings as well because we were living the same life. And so I started going. And I mean, for a long time, I wouldn't even admit I had a problem. But I started going to recovery and I eventually got a sponsor and I got sober. I didn't tell anybody I was sober, but I just told everybody.
Nobody knew you weren't really sober. I mean, they probably knew the lifestyle, but probably didn't realize how far you had actually gone.
The first time I remember realizing that I was changing was I walked by someone and I'm like, excuse me. And he's like, you're not going to yell at me? And I said, excuse me? And he's like, well, normally you say, get the F out of my way. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I just, just need by.
Yeah. You're like, wow, that's what I was.
And that's exactly what I was.
Yeah. So then we've got about a 7-year gap here. We go from 95 to 2002. And in 2002, you started back to church.
Mhm.
And so what,
During this whole time, I went to recovery meetings every week. I was
for these whole 7 years?
Mhm. very faithful to that. I dated someone during this time frame, but he didn't know I was in recovery. He didn't. I mean, he worked nights and I worked days, and no, we didn't have cell phones, so
Right.
I just went to meetings, and he didn't know it.
Yeah.
So I mean, there we are. The secrets continue. Work.
Nobody's actually in your life.
Nobody's actually in my life. Absolutely.
Everybody's at arm's length.
Absolutely.
So the next year, you met Logan's dad.
hmm
Logan is your son, for people that don't know. And then in 2005, you got married.
Yes.
And then in 2006, you were 37 and you had Logan.
Yes.
So tell us about having Logan and Logan's life as a baby and stuff. Let's talk about some of that.
So I had Logan, and from the very first day that I realized I was pregnant, I was convinced that God would take this baby from me for my sins.
And now I want you to elaborate on that. Did you feel that? Did you think you felt that way because of all of your sins, or were you just in your mind because of my abortion?
Because of my abortion.
Because of your abortion, you had this fear the whole entire pregnancy that God was going to take this baby.
Yes. And unfortunately, I couldn't talk to anybody about it because I had never spoke a word to anybody.
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew. Mom had passed.
So you basically went 9 months with crippling fear.
And at 17 weeks, I actually went to the bathroom early one morning, and I stood up and just flooded. And we went to the hospital, and the stupid ER doctor's like, I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't find a heartbeat. I said, you are not looking in the right place. And I take that heart monitor away from me. I was like, that baby's down here. He's like, that's not where the baby's supposed to be at. I said, well, I'm telling you, that's where the baby's at.
Yeah.
I was so mad because I had a fear.
Well, you're freaking out inside already.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm freaking out knowing it's my fault that this baby is going to die. So we get to nearly to full term. I'm at actually 36 weeks, and I dilate. And because the ultrasound showed that Logan was going to be born with part of his liver outside of his stomach, still in the umbilical cord, we knew we were going to deliver at UAMS. And so they could transport him over to Children's that day for surgery.
Right.
And so I went into labor, and we trying to have a baby, and I honestly am thinking that this baby's going to die. I just never thought that he would make it. And I have him, and I mean, the pictures of me after birth, I don't even look like I've had a baby. I mean, I just look like I'm laying in a hospital bed. But there's pictures of Logan, and they finally take him away to Children's within an hour or so. I don't get to hold him, which I was prepared for that because I didn't really even think he was going to make it that far. And so a couple hours after that, I was hurting down my leg, and it felt like I was having contractions again. And I asked the nurse if she was sure there was not another baby in there. And she's like, there's not another baby. Somebody in the room said, push and see what happens, and that it might be gas or something. And I pushed, and the bed filled full of blood. I had been hemorrhaging for
2 hours.
2 hours.
Wow.
So when that, I don't know what's happening. I just know something's not right. And I remember my eyes rolling back, and I think, I'm dead. I'm dead. And this was so hard for me after it was all over with. And a lot of people may struggle with this, but it's part of my story. I literally was standing at heaven's gate. God was there. I couldn't see the gate and I couldn't see God, but I knew where I was at and his presence was there. And so I look around and it's like the most beautiful place you've ever seen. It's just green, blue skies. I mean, like a meadow, like a perfect meadow. And in the distance, I see a man playing with a child. And at the time, I'm thinking, that's Alan and Logan. So I turn back around and I'm screaming at God, you can't do this to me. You've got to send me back. I just did the greatest thing I've ever done. And I just remember screaming. And all of a sudden, I wake up in the hospital bed. I came back. And my mother-in-law was actually like slapping my arm trying to get me to wake up. So this really affected me in a negative way. I'm not really in church at this point. Alan and I just didn't go to church much. Um, Immediately in my mind, what I had seen was Alan and Logan in heaven, and that I'd seen something in the future where they were going to die. So it was just more insanity, more secrets,
More anxiety.
more anxiety. And so it was at least 3 months. And I tell Alan, I said, tell me what happened the day I died or the day that Logan was born. And he's like, why? And I was like, just tell me. And so he explains it. And I'm like, did I die? And he's like, he starts laughing. I mean, he sugarcoated everything, everything. And I'm like, he's like, no, you didn't die. And I told him what I saw, and he started laughing. He said, oh, you were just dreaming. And which he didn't mean to, but it hurt, but it still confused me more because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know that I was so scared that Logan was going to get killed because I was still on that thing that my wrongdoings is not going to let me allow, God is not going to allow me to have a child. And some months later, I had my mother-in-law. I'm like, tell me what happened. And so she tells me, and I tell her what I saw, and she said, you were dead. She said, you were gray. And she said, and I was pinching you and slapping your arm when you woke up. And so I've told 2 people about that, and we're probably 6, 9 months into this. I'm terrified to have sex. I'm terrified that I'm going to get pregnant. I'm terrified Logan's going to die. I'm terrified Alan's going to die. I'm terrified. I'm just terrified, and nobody knows. Nobody knows any of this. They know I'm not okay,
Right.
but they don't know why I'm not okay.
So at this time, you're having marriage problems. You're in and out of church. Um, Sexual relationship problems. No sleep. Full-time career. You didn't fight, but you lived in silence.
We lived in silence.
So in 2008, Logan was born in 06. In 2008, you quit your career at ConAgra.
Logan had been sick. He was allergic to milk, and it created a major stomach problem along with everything else. I was sick. I had to have blood transfusions and iron transfusions, and I mean, we're,
Struggling
a year and a half later,
in every aspect.
and work is really starting to change. And I was told one day I was going to start coming in at 4 in the morning and staying until at least 4 in the afternoon, 6 and 7 days a week. And so I just quit.
Yeah, done.
I was done. I didn't care.
So in 2009, you got another job as a receptionist.
Hmm.
Then from 2010 to 2019, you worked to raise Logan. So tell me about these next 9 years as far as just whatever you want to, say or not say, or just elaborate on those 9 years of
So
you're constantly still tormented though, right?
I'm still tormented.
Okay.
I mean, until the last couple of years, I was tormented, terrified that something was going to happen to him because of my sins. Um, Alan and I fought on discipline because I'd been beat as a child. When Alan tried to whip him, and he probably needed it, I would just have a mental breakdown. I mean, I literally, you just as well been beating me.
Couldn't deal with it.
Couldn't deal with it. Sexual problems. He slept on the couch. I had my bed. He worked nights. I worked days. We very seldom talked during the week. We
Not much of a marriage.
saw each other on the weekend, and I usually tried to figure out somewhere to go where I didn't have to be with him because I still had that fear of having sex. I mean,
Terrified.
terrified, terrified. And I'd even had my tubes tied just shortly after Logan was born because of that. But I just never.
You wanted no chance of having another baby and having to go through that fear again, like with another one.
No.
So in 2020, COVID hit.
COVID hit.
Talk to me about that.
So, I was raised up. My dad was in the Army and National Guard. Before I was born, he was sent to Nevada for chemical warfare testing, nuclear testing. And so he was a guinea pig. And so I was raised during the Cold War. And the Russians are going to get us and all of this. And when COVID started, it started triggering me that a way that I'd never been triggered. I was terrified to step outside. I mean, I know we were exposed to chemicals, especially in Desert Storm. I just knew this was the end of time, and that the government, I didn't trust them, and they were going to kill us. I was in charge of decontamination at work and all the janitors' contracts.
And like this was bad enough that every time you left your house, you just cried.
I just cried.
Because you were totally PTSD all the way.
Yes.
And just terrified.
Just terrified.
So you had a friend that convinced you to call for help.
Mm-hmm. The VA.
So you called the VA. You start therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
I don't tell anybody.
Right. So it's all still secretive.
It's all still secret. Pam knows about it.
The one that talked you into calling,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in your note here, you said that the VA took away your meds. So what were you on during this time? Because you were on some meds to help you cope already, just
mm-hmm.
from your doctor, I'm assuming.
Yes, Klonopin and Xanax and anything else I could talk them into giving me.
Right. Just anything to numb you up.
Yeah, it's, if I had to be faced with anything that made me uncomfortable, whether it was going to Walmart or having relationships with my husband, I took a pill.
Yeah.
Because the anxiety was so bad, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's crippling.
It was crippling. And so at this point, to say that I was probably addicted to
Xanax and Klonopin
is probably absolutely true.
So they take these away, of course. They're going to do therapy, and they're like, "You don't need these, and we're gonna fix this another way."
Mm-hmm.
And That was a big deal.
It was a big deal. It was a really big deal.
So from 21 to 22, you continued therapy. Still nobody knows. Says you go on your lunch break. So you just, I mean, literally just, do you think, like, and I wonder too, just, I don't know you that well, but I feel like I've gotten to know you a little bit over the last year or two. And something we see a lot, especially with women, most always with women, is shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that you had, you know, all this anxiety and stuff, and then the trouble with keeping secrets and not being open. But do you think it was also maybe the reason you kept it so secretive for so long was you were dealing with shame over it?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure there were so many emotions. I mean, they just had to be, I mean, we're 4 years later.
Yeah.
And I mean, it took 2 years before I even told Alan I was going to therapy.
Yeah.
Or why I was going to therapy. He was
Wow.
like, well, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew we were getting along better.
So he was saying that therapy was helping some.
Mm-hmm. But, he was confused. But
right. Yeah. So toward the end of 22, that's when you told him about the therapy and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In June to July, 2 of his grandparents who lived next door had died.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Life Changed Forever. Why did Life Change Forever?
They were the glue that held us together. They were the glue that held everybody together.
The family.
My parents had both passed. And I think when I met Alan, not only did I love him,
you loved all of his family.
He had the family.
Yeah, that you had never had.
Exactly. And Roy and Dorothy lived next door, and they took me in as one of their own. And
so then they both passed away.
Mm-hmm. So we've been married like 16 years, and they both passed away. They've been married for 60 plus years, and they died 4 weeks to the day apart from each other. It
wasn't going to do life with them.
No, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. They were always the one that kind of gave me hope, and they're the reason that I stayed. Between them and Logan, there was no way, even though that I thought a million times about leaving Alan. And it wasn't so much about it was some of what Alan did, but it was more about me. It was more about the secrets.
Yeah.
And
you still didn't really have anybody in your life.
No. Not at all. I have people that have known me, especially during that time, they'd be like, she's a rock.
Yeah.
I was solid.
Yeah.
I had a solid career. I was intimidating at times,
You seem like just a strong woman who's got it all figured out.
Yeah. Yeah. I never will forget one day during COVID, I was working for a bank, and one of the safes, the battery wire, and they couldn't get into it. The battery wire had come off. And so I was sitting in this little closet, about this big, with a safe in it and a soldering gun, and I'm soldering this wire back on, and I get another phone call. And, I'm getting like 50, 75 phone calls a day related to COVID and problems that's happening in the bank. And I just broke down and started bawling, like hysterically. Well, about that time, this girl that I work with, Jasmine, walks in, and she's like, oh my gosh.
Like, totally didn't know what to do.
No.
Because Miss Helen don't cry.
No. She's like, what I need to do? I said, don't let anybody come in here.
Yeah.
And so she stood at the door, and there were people walking up, and I'm in there trying to get my stuff together. And I finally pulled it together, and we to this day joked about me in the closet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it freaked her. It really freaked her out because I was supposed to be the one that had it all together.
Wow. So January to May of 23, you decided that you wanted a divorce.
Logan had started driving and running around with his friends quite a bit. You know, he's 15,
Right.
and I'm finding myself at home alone with Alan. And at this point, he has disowned his brother, disowned his mom. His grandparents have passed, and it's like his grandparents kind of helped raise him and played a big part in that. But I think any resentment that he probably ever had, he kept inside until his grandparents passed.
And then there was
Then it was
no
like
good
Pandora's box.
Right.
He was so angry. So angry.
Sounds like those two people have had a big influence on
Oh my gosh. You know, they would get on my nerves. But they showed me that family life that I'd never had.
And so now, your marriage has been crumbling for a long time.
Mm-hmm. It's been crumbling.
In reality, probably both just generational curses that haven't been dealt with. And now the family aspect's not there.
Logan is the only thing that I care for.
And Logan's old enough to drive, and you're finding yourself alone more in a situation you don't want to be in. So you make the decision to leave. Just
boom.
Just
I was done. I told you once before I walked out because I was done. That's just, you know, I had talked several times to Alan about, you know, I remember 5 years before that, on a day after, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, I told him, I said, you've lost me. I said, we have got to work on this. And, you know, we had money problems, and I was like, you always beat up on the bad stuff on me. But I was like, you don't even know that I have this much money in my 401. He's like, what?
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a substantial amount of money, but he felt like I was the one that run through the money all the time, which anytime I ever got mad at him, because I knew it made him mad,
You go spend money.
I'd go spend money because that was my way to get back at him. Unfortunately, he didn't know that.
Yeah.
So it was not doing any good. It was just
He just was mad at you because you were spending money.
Mm-hmm. And he didn't keep up with it, so he never knew
how much or anything like that. So May the 6th, you move out, and May the 7th,
I had been invited to church. Ashley and Sean, well, Ashley Ingalls, but it's going to be Sean David. Ashley Davis one of these days. Ashley and Sean had invited me to church, and I arrive at church, and she's like, we sat up here, the third pew back on the right. I'm like, I'm not sitting in the front. And I wasn't really sure I could even sit in the back.
Yeah.
And
I remember when you told this to us before, you know, you said it took everything I had.
Everything I had to step foot in that church. Because
to make it to the back pew.
So not only had I killed the baby, not only was I scared of losing Logan, it was that much more now because he was really all I felt like I had left.
Right.
We sat on this back pew that wasn't much bigger than this couch, and we all crammed in there together. Me and Logan and Ashley and Sean, and my sister was with me. And Brother Kurt preached on divorce and how that if you're getting divorced, that's because you didn't do the right thing, and you didn't have God in your life, and you need to work on it some more. And I felt awful. I was like, but I had worked on it all I possibly could, you know, at this time. You know,
was broken.
I was broken. There'll be a part of me that will always love Alan. I mean, the first 2 years of our marriage, perfect. It was when I got pregnant. From the day I got pregnant, it just deteriorated.
Which went back to the abortion.
Yes. And so I managed to make it through that church service. And church was again that night at 5 o'clock. And Logan and I went back to church that night. And we have missed I bet probably less than 5 services since. And it's been a year and a half. But every Sunday, it was like Brother Kurt was preaching to me. And
so I don't want to leave that first day though. You said here that you went to the altar that morning.
oh yeah, I had not.
I cannot imagine how hard that was to.
You know, I was raised in a church that you went to the altar, but I had never been to the altar in a Baptist church.
Right.
I mean, I was a child the last time I really was around anybody who went to the altar. So I went to the altar, and I think Ashley went with me. But I remember I was praying hard because I just didn't know what to do. I didn't want a divorce, but I didn't want to live there. I didn't want to lose Logan. I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Didn't have the answer.
I didn't have an answer. I was sober. I was
had a good job.
Had a good job. I was, to everybody in the world, I was a rock. But I was up there with my head on the altar. And when I told God that if you'll help me get through this, I'll do whatever you put in front of me. Whatever you put in front of me, I will do it. And I finished, and I remember looking down, there's this big old puddle of tears. And I remember taking my shirt tail, wiping it off, saying, sorry, God, I didn't mean to leave tears on your altar. Which is
That's what he wants.
That's what he wants. But at the time, you know, I was embarrassed still yet. And so I just started doing what I could every day. And priority was going to church. Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Sunday
got
night.
all in.
Got it all in. Logan was going with me. I didn't have to make him go. He wanted to go. And I mean, it's just like a redemption and revival started happening. My life started changing.
So you end up, the divorce is final, you start a new job. That was in October of 23.
Mm-hmm.
In November, you tell the first person your story about the abortion and what led up to the divorce. Well, here we are in November.
1 year later. 1 year later. I hadn't thought about that. But my best friend's mom, who basically, I mean, they adopted Logan because my parents were passed. And so they'd been with me this whole time, but she didn't know any of this. And so
you told her.
Because I trusted her and because I felt like I needed to tell somebody, I told her. We were cooking Thanksgiving, like dinner, I think. I don't remember. We were cooking.
Mm-hmm.
But I started telling her the story and she just started bawling. And I started bawling. And so the thing I realized that day was I needed to tell my story. I mean, it's not the worst thing that's ever happened.
It's your story.
It's my story, and it's absolutely controlled my entire life.
Yeah. And the secrets.
And the secrets.
And the shame, and the fear, and the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So, in December, you made an offer on the house.
Mm-hmm.
That's December of 23.
Mm-hmm.
24, you got on this paper the year of faith and revival.
Absolutely.
So what has this year been for Helen?
You know, when I made the offer on the house, at this point I'm a single parent. The divorce has been final like 2 months. I don't know that I can buy a house, but I was living in a rent house and it was, it was clean, it was okay, but I wasn't home. I wanted to be back home more than anything, and I wanted to have a home for Logan.
Yeah.
And no matter how hard I tried in that house, it just wasn't right. And so I made an offer on that house. 30 days from the day I made an offer, we were closing and moving in like a few days later.
God handled it.
Absolutely. I mean, it was like one of the first things that happened this year that made me realize that it's going to be okay. Yeah. And, about this time I tell another person that I trust my story. And she's like, "Oh, Helen," she said, "I had no idea." Yeah. I said, "Well, neither did anybody else." I said, "Don't worry about it. It's no big deal." Yeah. And so I started slowly telling this story, and then I got to hearing Rhonda talk from church, and you talking, and all of a sudden I had this desire to tell Rhonda specifically
because of
Hope Place, my story. Mm-hmm. And so I told you out here one day, and so you made it happen. You hooked us up, and so I even brought Beverly, another friend from church.
But, and then we dropped Edie on you.
And then here was Edie, bless her heart, and she's talking about going to prison, and I'm really asking her a lot of questions because I have no doubt that our paths crossed back in the early 90s. It had to have. And but she was like, oh, she had what I wanted. She had the joy. Yeah. Brother Kurt preached it, I think it was on Sunday, I don't remember. They run together the other day about it's not happiness we need, it's joy. Yeah. And I think I've struggled to try to be happy, and
I think that was Sunday. I think that was this past Sunday.
Yeah. He's really preached to me a lot this week. And so, I want the joy she had. Yeah. And I know she had some problems. Right. Life is never easy, but I barely knew her. Yeah. But I would watch her, and she'd be over there with her hands up, and
no matter what she was struggling, she was still praising him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was an amazing person, and I wish I could have known her better.
Well, you are an amazing person too.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm so proud of you, and I'm so thankful that I can call you my friend. Because I do. I call you my friend.
It's I felt alone until this year because, Alan and I had completely different tastes of friends, and he never liked anybody that I tried to run around with. Right. And probably with good reason, some of them, I don't know. Yeah. But I hadn't had any true friends. I had friends at work, Ashley and Sandy, and I have a lot of friends, but they don't know me. They don't know the secrets. And even Ashley and Sandy that did not know the whole story. Right. And so, I don't know, we just started going to church, and it
changes things.
It changes things.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I want to thank you for sharing, but I want to wrap it up. But like everybody else, I've given the opportunity. I want you to address whoever's watching. You don't have to look at it if you don't want to, but I want you, what do you feel is just so important for your story? Like as far as people that can connect with your story, those people, what would you leave them with? Like, what do they need to know? Like, what can give them hope?
The hope comes from God. And I didn't have hope until I found God and made peace with God, because, I thought God was angry at me. But, I sat at that altar and I asked for God's forgiveness, and I knew that He had forgiven me,
Yeah.
but I had to forgive myself.
Mm.
And for me, until I started telling my story and telling the secrets, and obviously I haven't told everything today, but somebody knows. I don't think there's anything that somebody doesn't know now.
Right.
Between church, God, Maple Springs, and the other people who have come in my life, I've got friends. I've got people I trust.
You're not alone.
I'm not alone.
That's a big deal to know that.
Mm-hmm. It is. Because I've been very much a loner
Your whole life.
because of that mentality. And it's a miserable life.
Yeah.
Had I had not had the breakdown after Logan was born about losing him and,
right,
terrified of getting pregnant again, if I would have got active in church, got active in therapy.
Well, and if you would have coped with that abortion prior to then.
Yes.
Instead of holding it all in.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hit on this too. Like, we don't typically come in and just talk about topics, and I never want this to turn political or anything like that. But I think it's important for women to see this side of things, because I feel like most of the time the women who have an abortion, they don't understand the cost. And I don't mean.
And this year politically, it's just gives me chills when I hear them talk about it. And I've heard women say, "My body, my choice." And I think you have no
You
idea.
don't understand. Yeah.
I literally would rather die as to kill another child. I don't want to live.
Yeah.
I just
wouldn't happen.
No, that baby would have been an adult now. I mean, I always assumed it was a girl for some reason.
Yeah.
But she'd be like 36.
Wow. Well,
so don't live that life. I mean, you can tell the difference from when I talk about that and when I talk about 2024 and talk about, I mean, you just have to live with me to understand what good things have happened this year.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a wonderful job. I work with great people. I have a great church family. I wouldn't trade your brother Kurt for anything.
He's the best.
He's the best. I mean, it's just good.
It's God.
It's good. It's God.
That's what He does.
And
but it took.
There is no way I can explain to someone what they're about to put themselves through.
Yeah. And to have this, it always seems it takes the broken vessel before it can be turned around. And your story, you went through so much. And you dabbled in church over the years.
Mm-hmm.
But it took broken Helen.
I was broken.
Yeah. It took broken Helen to lay it at the altar in a puddle of tears, give it to God, and say, "I'm yours."
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And He's making beautiful, beautiful, beautiful things out of it.
He is. I mean, Logan's about to graduate high school. I used to have that incredible fear of any time he was not with me that something was going to happen to him. in the last year, I mean, I don't ride him at all about, he tells me where he's going, and
Well, we know that fear is from the devil.
absolutely,
God does not have a
absolutely,
spirit of fear. And
absolutely. And fear and secrets will kill you.
yeah, and God is delivering you from that.
Absolutely.
Well, Helen, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. I am so proud of you. I love you. And I can't wait to see what God does next. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.
Well, that's the end. I know that there's somebody out there that this story is going to help. If you know someone that you think can really relate to what Helen has been through, be sure to send them this link and let them watch it, because I have full faith that we're not doing this in vain and that God has a purpose for this podcast and for these stories that people are getting so vulnerable to share. Um, I know that nobody I've had on this podcast so far is sharing this for just them. Helen, though, she had a little different story. She needed to share this for her. And I'm so proud of her for being so bold and so brave and stepping out on faith and knowing that God wanted her to do this. But while sometimes it's good for us to share, our purpose behind these testimonies is to help you, whoever you are out there that's watching. I just pray that you can gain encouragement, that you can know that Jesus has the answers, especially when we don't, but He has the answers all the time. And I pray that there's somebody out there that may be lost and comes to know Jesus through these stories. If you ever have questions or you don't know the Lord, feel free to reach out. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing. We just want to give honor and glory to God, and we want to lead people to Christ, whether that be for the first time for salvation, or whether it be somebody who's struggling or backslid or just has no hope, no joy. You're not alone. And I pray that these testimonies will help you. Hopefully, we'll have something else for you next week. Until then, have a blessed day.